The doorbell chimed 3 times in rapid succession, followed by aggressive knocking that made my coffee mug rattle. I already knew who it was. Only one person had that particular way of announcing their presence, like they were declaring war on my front door. "Coming?" I called out, quickly smoothing down my shirt. My name is Danielle, and I was about to face my own personal nightmare, my mother-in-law, Sabrina. When I opened the door, there she stood in all her glory, perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit, with not one but 3 massive suitcases beside her. "Danielle, dear," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks. You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep? That's not helping your situation, you know." Before I could respond, she was already directing the poor Uber driver to bring her luggage inside. My stomach dropped at the sight of those bags. This wasn't a casual visit. "Sabrina, we weren't expecting you," I managed to say, watching helplessly as her belongings invaded my carefully organized foyer. "Corbin didn't mention you were coming." "Oh, that's because I didn't tell him," she replied breezily, already making her way to our guest room like she owned the place. I decided it was time for an intervention. 2 years of marriage and still no grandchildren? Something needs to be done. I followed her upstairs, my hands clenching and unclenching. "We've talked about this, Corbin and I have been trying." She cut in, making air quotes. Yes, but clearly you need help. That's why I'm here. I've brought some special herbs from my naturopath, and I've scheduled appointments with the best fertility specialist in the city." I stood in the doorway, watching her unpack like she was settling in for a month-long siege. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Lucille. "Coffee in 20? Need to tell you something." "I have plans," I said, already backing away. "With a friend." Sabrina looked up from her suitcase, her eyes narrowing. "More important than family planning?" "It's work-related," I lied. "Very urgent. I'll be back in a couple of hours." I practically ran down the stairs, grabbing my keys and purse. As I started the car, I could see Sabrina watching from the guest room window, probably already planning ways to fix my apparently broken body. The coffee shop was my sanctuary, and Lucille was already there with 2 steaming mugs waiting. One look at my face and she knew. "Spill it," she said, sliding my vanilla latte closer. "She's here, with luggage, 3 suitcases worth of luggage," I groaned, collapsing into the chair. "And she's brought herbs, Lucille." "Oh God," Lucille winced. "The fertility crusade continues?" "She doesn't know when to stop," I said, lowering my voice. "And we can't tell her about the adoption plans yet. It would break her traditional little heart, and probably Corbin's chances of ever having peace again." "Speaking of the adoption," Lucille leaned forward. "That's actually why I wanted to meet. I just heard from my contact at the agency. There's a little girl, 8 years old. Her name is Leah." My heart skipped a beat. "Tell me everything." "She's amazing, Danny. Smart, funny, been through some tough times, but still has the biggest heart. They think you and Corbin would be perfect for her." I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. This was what we'd been waiting for, planning for in secret, and now Sabrina was camping out in our house, probably burning sage and mixing fertility potions. My phone buzzed again, Corbin this time. "Mom just called. Why didn't you tell me she was coming?" "Because I didn't know," I typed back furiously. "Your mother has staged a fertility intervention. Help." "On my way home," he replied. "Try not to kill her before I get there?" I looked at Lucille, who was watching me with sympathy. "I have to go back, don't I?" "Unless you want to move in with me," she offered with a small smile, "though I suspect she'd find you there too." Standing up, I squared my shoulders. If she only knew that while she's trying to fix me, we're about to make her a grandmother in a way she never expected. "Just hold on to that thought," Lucille said, giving my hand a squeeze. It'll make all her meddling easier to bear. As I drove home, I could see Sabrina through the living room window, rearranging my furniture according to what I assumed were her feng shui principles. This was going to be a long week, or however long those 3 suitcases were planning to stay. Little did she know I had a secret weapon, the knowledge that somewhere out there, a little girl named Leah was waiting to make our family complete, in a way no amount of herbs or fertility treatments ever could. Quick, she's in the shower, I whispered urgently to Corbin, tugging him toward the basement door. The adoption paperwork wasn't going to review itself, and these stolen moments were all we had now. The basement lights flickered on, revealing our makeshift office, a card table covered with documents, photos, and dreams of our future family. 3 days into Sabrina's surprise stay, and we'd gotten pretty good at this cloak and dagger routine. Leah's caseworker sent over the final forms, Corbin said, pulling papers from his briefcase. We need to sign these tonight. The sound of running water upstairs was our timer. I grabbed a pen, scanning the documents as quickly as possible while still being thorough. This was too important to rush. Did you see what Mom did to the kitchen? Corbin asked, his voice tight. She's hung dried herbs everywhere, says they promote fertility. Oh, I saw, and smelled, and sneezed. I replied, initialing another page. Don't forget the fertility goddess statue she placed in our bedroom. I'm sorry about all this, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I should talk to her. The water stopped. We froze, looking at each other in panic. Danielle, Corbin? Sabrina's voice called from upstairs. Where are you two? We scrambled to gather the papers. Corbin shoved them back into his briefcase just as footsteps approached the basement door. The handle jiggled. Why is this door locked? Sabrina's voice was sharp with suspicion. Just organizing some old boxes, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. Lots of dust down here. You wouldn't want to ruin your outfit. Nonsense, I can help. Open the door. Corbin gave me a desperate look. I pointed to the storage boxes we'd actually been meaning to organize. He nodded, quickly pulling them out while I ran up the stairs. Opening the door, I came face to face with Sabrina, her hair wrapped in a towel and wearing what looked like a very expensive silk robe. See? Just boxes, I gestured behind me. Corbin's trying to find his old baseball cards. She peered past me, eyes narrowing. In the dark? I flicked on the stairwell light, mentally kicking myself for not noticing we'd turned everything off in our panic. Found them, Corbin called up, waving a dusty shoebox. My husband, the quick thinker. Well, since you're both free now, Sabrina said, clapping her hands together, I've organized a little gathering for tonight. Just a few close friends who specialize in alternative medicine and fertility treatments. My stomach dropped. Tonight? But we have nothing that can't be rescheduled, she interrupted. This is about family, Danielle. Our family's future. I felt my phone vibrate. Probably Freddie, my brother, checking if I was still sane. I'd been texting him hourly updates about Operation Survive Sabrina. I'll start preparing the house, Sabrina continued, already walking away. We'll need to rearrange the living room for the healing circle. The moment she was out of earshot, Corbin emerged from the basement, briefcase clutched to his chest like a shield. Healing circle? Your mother is trying to sage me into pregnancy, I whispered back. We need backup. I'm calling Freddie. 10 minutes later, I was hiding in the pantry with my phone. Fred, I'm dying here. She's invited her whole fertility cult over. Want me to create a diversion? My brother offered. I could fake an emergency. No, I need you here. Come to the gathering. Bring wine. Lots of wine. You're not supposed to drink while trying to conceive, he said in a perfect imitation of Sabrina's voice. Freddie. Kidding. I'll be there. Want me to accidentally spill something on her healing crystals? Despite everything, I laughed. Just hurry. Emerging from the pantry, I found Sabrina had already transformed our living room into something between a new age shop and a fertility temple. Crystals everywhere, candles burning, and was that incense? The energy in here was all wrong, she explained, seeing my expression. No wonder you're having troubles. But don't worry. By the end of tonight, we'll have your chakras aligned and your womb ready for my grandchild. I caught Corbin's eye across the room. He was standing by the basement door, one hand protectively on his briefcase, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I couldn't blame him. If only Sabrina knew that while she was preparing to cleanse my chakras, we were preparing to welcome an 8-year-old girl into our lives. A little girl who needed a family far more than Sabrina needed a biological grandchild. The doorbell rang, the first of Sabrina's fertility experts arriving. I took a deep breath, remembering Leah's photo tucked safely away in the basement. We just had to get through this night. And maybe, just maybe, Freddie would actually spill that wine on something important. Sunday brunch was Sabrina's latest battlefield strategy. She'd invited the entire family, including her sister and niece, Leah, the same name as our potential adoptive daughter, which felt like the universe playing some cosmic joke. More mimosa? Freddie whispered, appearing at my elbow with the bottle. He'd been my saving grace through this whole ordeal, keeping my glass full and my sanity intact. Please, I muttered, watching Sabrina arrange place settings with military precision, though I probably shouldn't. According to last night's fertility priestess, alcohol is poison to my baby-making chances. Speaking of chances, Sabrina announced loudly, making everyone at the table jump. I have a wonderful suggestion for Corbin and Danielle. My fork clattered against the plate. Corbin reached for my hand under the table. As you all know, my dear niece Leah needs a stable home environment, Sabrina continued, gesturing to the quiet 8-year-old sitting at the far end of the table. And since Danielle and Corbin are struggling, perhaps fostering Leah would be the perfect solution. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the young girl, who looked up from her pancakes with wide eyes. This Leah had the same dark curls as our Leah, the same uncertain smile. Mom, Corbin started, but Sabrina steamrolled over him. It makes perfect sense. You can practice being parents, and Leah gets a loving home. Who knows? Maybe the act of nurturing will jumpstart your fertility. Sabrina, her sister Jane interrupted, we haven't discussed this. Excuse me, I said, pushing back from the table. The room was spinning slightly. I need some air. I fled to the back porch, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. The door opened behind me and small footsteps approached. Are you okay? A tiny voice asked. I turned to find Leah, Sabrina's Leah, standing there, holding a napkin-wrapped pancake. I brought you breakfast, she said, offering it to me. You didn't finish yours. Thank you, I managed, taking the slightly sticky package. That's very thoughtful of you. She leaned against the railing beside me, kicking her feet against the deck. Aunt Sabrina talks a lot about babies. I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, she certainly does. I don't want to be your practice baby, she said suddenly, looking up at me with serious eyes. That's what she meant, right? Using me to practice? My heart cracked a little. No one should ever be used as practice, I said firmly. You deserve a family who wants you for you, not as a test run. The door opened again, and Corbin stepped out. Everything okay out here? We're having a pancake party, I said, holding up my napkin. Want to join? He sat down on the steps, and Leah surprised us both by plopping down next to him. Your mom is intense, she informed him matter-of-factly. Corbin choked on a laugh. Yeah, she really is. Inside, we could hear Sabrina and Jane arguing in heated whispers. Freddie's voice occasionally cut through, probably trying to mediate. "Do you want kids?" Leah asked suddenly, looking between us. "For real, not practice ones?" Corbin and I exchanged glances. "Yes," I said softly. "We really do." She nodded sagely. "You'd be good at it. You didn't talk to me like I'm stupid. Most grown-ups do that." Before we could respond, Sabrina burst onto the porch. "There you all are. We're discussing important family matters, and you're out here eating cold pancakes?" "We're bonding," Leah announced, standing up. "And they don't want to practice on me. They want real kids." Sabrina's face went through several interesting expressions before settling on something between confusion and frustration. "Well, of course they want real. I mean, you are real. I just thought—" "I think we're done here," Jane said firmly, appearing behind her sister. "Leah, honey, get your jacket. We're going home." As they left, Leah turned back to give us a small wave. I waved back, fighting tears. "Well," Sabrina huffed once they'd gone, "that could have gone better, but don't worry, I have other ideas." "Mom," Corbin cut in, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in days. "Enough, please," she blinked at him, startled. "I'm only trying to help." By ambushing us? By trying to use a child as some kind of fertility experiment? I couldn't keep the anger from my voice anymore. "That's not help, Sabrina. That's control." She drew herself up, nostrils flaring. "Well, if you had a better plan for giving me grandchildren—" "Maybe we do," I snapped, then immediately bit my tongue. Corbin's hand found mine again, squeezing hard. Sabrina's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" But I was already turning away, pulling Corbin with me. We had a different Leah waiting for us, one who wouldn't be anyone's practice run. And suddenly, keeping that secret felt more like a burden than a shield. The children's home was quieter than I expected, filled with afternoon sunlight and crayon drawings on the walls. Our Leah sat cross-legged on a beanbag chair, a book open in her lap, dark curls falling over her face, just like in her photo. "She loves to read," Ms. Martinez, the social worker, whispered, "especially adventure stories." I watched as Leah turned a page, completely absorbed in her world of words. When she finally looked up and saw us, her whole face lit up with recognition from our previous visits. "You came back!" She jumped up, the book tumbling forgotten to the floor. "We promised we would," I said, kneeling down to her level. "What are you reading today?" "Harry Potter. I'm at the part where—" She launched into an elaborate explanation of Hogwarts houses and magical creatures, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. Corbin sat down on the floor, and Leah immediately included him in her story, asking which house he thought he'd be in. I watched them interact, my heart so full it hurt. "Would you like to go to the park?" I asked when she finally paused for breath. "Ms. Martinez said we could take you out for ice cream, too." "Really?" Her eyes widened. "Can I get 2 scoops?" "3 if you want," Corbin said, earning himself a high five. The playground was almost empty when we arrived. Leah made a beeline for the swings, calling over her shoulder, "Push me, both of you." We spent the next hour watching her conquer every piece of equipment, her laughter echoing across the park. When she finally slowed down, we walked to the ice cream shop, where she carefully selected chocolate, strawberry, and mint chip. "1 for each scoop." "You have ice cream on your nose," I laughed, reaching out with a napkin. She scrunched up her face but let me wipe it off. "My friend Maria says you're going to be my new mom and dad," she said suddenly, looking between us. "Is that true?" I felt Corbin tense beside me. We'd been working toward this moment, but it still caught us off guard. "We'd like to be," I said carefully, "if that's something you'd want to." She stirred her melting ice cream thoughtfully. "Would I have my own room?" Absolutely, Corbin nodded. You could decorate it however you want. And could I bring my books? Every single one, I promised. She seemed to consider this deeply. What about your mom? She asked, looking at Corbin. The one who visits a lot? Maria says she heard the grown-ups talking about her. My stomach clenched. Of course, word about Sabrina's frequent visits to check on the adoption process had gotten around. She doesn't know about you yet, Corbin admitted. We're waiting for the right time to tell her. Is it because I'm not a baby? Leah's voice was small now, her ice cream forgotten. No, sweetheart. I reached across the table to take her hand. It's because you're so special that we want to make sure everything is perfect when we tell her. She's going to love you just as much as we do. Promise? Promise, Corbin and I said together. The rest of the afternoon passed too quickly. Back at the children's home, Leah hugged us both tightly before running inside to tell Maria about her 3-scoop ice cream adventure. We were halfway to the car when I heard Sabrina's voice. Well, well, what a surprise finding you here. She stood by her Mercedes, arms crossed, eyes sharp. My blood ran cold. Mom, what are you doing here? Corbin's voice cracked slightly. Following my instincts, she said, pushing away from her car. When you two kept sneaking off, I knew something was going on. But this, she gestured at the building behind us. This is what you've been hiding? Sabrina, we can explain. Explain what? That you're planning to adopt without even consulting me? That you're giving up on having a real family? She is real, I snapped, fury rising in my chest. Leah is more real and more precious than any of your fertility rituals or family planning schemes. Leah? Sabrina's eyes widened. You're not serious? That troubled little girl from brunch? Is this some kind of revenge because I suggested fostering her cousin? They're not even related, Corbin cut in. It's a different Leah, Mom, our Leah, and we're going to be her parents, whether you approve or not. Sabrina's face hardened. We'll see about that. I won't stand by and watch you make this mistake. There are other solutions, better solutions. No, I stepped forward, my voice steady despite my racing heart. There aren't, because Leah isn't a solution. She's our daughter, and if you can't accept that, then maybe it's time for you to go home. She stared at us for a long moment before getting into her car. As she drove away, I could see her on her phone, already making calls. She's going to try to stop this, Corbin said quietly. Let her try, I replied, thinking of Leah's smile, her ice cream-covered nose, her dreams of a room filled with books. Some things are worth fighting for. She's talking to divorce lawyers, Lucille said, sliding her phone across the cafe table to show me the text from her cousin who worked at a prestigious law firm. Apparently, she's looking into ways to prove you're destroying the family legacy or some nonsense. I stared at the message, my coffee growing cold. Can she even do that? We're both adults. She's trying to build a case that you've manipulated Corbin away from having real children. Lucille made air quotes with her fingers. It's ridiculous, but she's got money and connections. My phone buzzed. Another message from Sabrina. Having dinner at the house tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. We need to discuss the future of this family. She's not even staying at our house anymore, but she's still acting like she owns it. I groaned, showing Lucille the message. Then maybe it's time, Lucille said, leaning forward. Tell her everything, on your terms, before she digs up the information herself. Corbin's terrified it'll destroy his relationship with her forever. And what about your relationship with Leah? What about her future? The image of Leah's hopeful face flashed through my mind. We were supposed to visit her again tomorrow, but Sabrina's meddling was threatening everything. You're right, I said, standing up. I need to talk to Corbin. I found him in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Mom's called 6 times today, he said without looking up. I know what we need to do, I said, perching on his desk. We need to tell her, tonight, everything. He finally met my eyes. She'll never forgive us. Maybe not, but Leah needs us to be brave for her. His phone rang again, Sabrina's face lighting up the screen. This time, he answered. Yes, Mom, we'll be there. No, just us. Because it's our house. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Fine, see you at 7. She's bringing reinforcements, he sighed after hanging up. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia. Perfect, I said, surprising him. Let's invite Freddie too, and Lucille. If she wants witnesses, we'll have our own. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Freddie arrived early, helping me stress clean the house while simultaneously trying to calm me down. Remember when we were kids, he said, dusting the mantel, and you were terrified to tell Mom you'd broken her favorite vase? But when you finally did, it wasn't nearly as bad as you'd imagined? This is slightly bigger than a vase, Fred. Same principle, though. Rip off the Band-Aid. The doorbell rang at exactly 7. Sabrina swept in with her entourage, taking in the extra place settings with narrowed eyes. I thought I said family only, she said, spotting Lucille arranging wine glasses. They are family, I replied firmly. The kind we choose. Dinner was excruciating. Sabrina kept making pointed comments about bloodlines and family traditions, while Uncle Robert nodded sagely and Aunt Patricia clicked her tongue in disapproval. Finally, as dessert was served, Sabrina cleared her throat. I've been doing some research. So have we, Corbin interrupted, standing up. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. Mom, there's something you need to know. Sit down, dear. I'm not finished. No, Mom. For once, you're going to listen. He walked to his briefcase by the door and pulled out a folder. Danielle and I are adopting. We've been approved, and we've found our daughter. Her name is Leah. She's 8 years old, and she's amazing. The silence was absolute. Sabrina's face went from red to white to red again. This is what you've been hiding? She finally managed. This is why you've been sneaking around? We wanted to do this our way, I said, moving to stand beside Corbin. Without pressure, without judgment. Without family, you mean, she spat. Without considering what this would do to our legacy, our name. A name isn't a legacy, Freddie cut in. Love is, and they've got plenty of that. You don't understand, Sabrina turned to her siblings. They're making a horrible mistake. There are treatments, specialists. Show them the picture, Lucille said quietly. Corbin pulled out the photo of Leah at the park. Her face split in a huge grin as she sat between us on the swings. This is your granddaughter, Mom, if you'll have her. Aunt Patricia gasped softly. Uncle Robert leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. But Sabrina stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I need time to think, she said stiffly. This is not what I wanted for you. It's not about what you want anymore, Corbin said, his voice breaking slightly. It's about what Leah needs, what we need. She gathered her purse and coat, ignoring her siblings' protests. At the door, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this decision, she said quietly. Mark my words. As the door closed behind her, I felt Corbin's hand find mine. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. For Leah, the kitchen timer chimed as I pulled another batch of cookies from the oven. Stress baking had taken over the house. Cookies, brownies, and a cake all lined the counters. Tonight's family dinner would either be a breakthrough or a breakdown, and I was preparing for both. Those smell amazing, Freddie said, snatching a warm cookie. But I think you've made enough to feed an army. I need everything to be perfect, I said, arranging cookies on a plate. Leah's coming tonight, her first dinner here with the whole family. Except Sabrina, he reminded me gently. Have you heard from her at all? Radio silence for 3 days, but she's been busy. I showed him my phone, screenshots from various family members of Sabrina's social media posts about preserving family bloodlines and the importance of biological connections. Classy, Freddie muttered, reaching for another cookie. The doorbell rang, making me jump. That's too early. Nobody's supposed to be here for 2 hours. But when I opened the door, there stood Sabrina. We need to talk, she said, brushing past me into the house. She stopped short at the sight of all the baked goods. What's all this? Family dinner tonight, I said carefully. Leah's coming. Her face tightened. That's actually why I'm here. I've been doing some research on that girl. Her name is Leah, I corrected, and she's in the system because her mother is in prison? Sabrina cut in. Did you know that? What kind of genetic predisposition might she have? What behaviors might surface? Get out. Freddie's voice was cold. I hadn't even noticed him following us into the hallway. This is family business, Sabrina snapped. Exactly, and you're trying to destroy a family before it even has a chance to begin. The front door opened again, and Corbin walked in, stopping short at the scene before him. Mom, what are you doing here? Trying to save you from a terrible mistake. She pulled papers from her purse. I have documentation about the girl's background, her family history. Stop, Corbin said, his voice firm. Just stop. We know Leah's story. She told us herself because she trusts us, because we're going to be her parents. But she's not. If you finish that sentence, I cut in, you'll never meet your granddaughter. Is that what you want? Sabrina's mouth snapped shut. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. She's coming for dinner tonight, Corbin said quietly. Stay. Meet her properly. Give her a chance. The silence stretched thin as Sabrina looked around, at the cookies cooling on racks, the fresh flowers on the table, the small welcome sign Corbin and I had made together. Fine, she said finally. I'll stay, but don't expect me to pretend this is ideal. The next 2 hours were tense. Lucille arrived early to help, shooting worried glances at Sabrina, who had positioned herself in the living room like a queen on her throne. Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia came next, looking uncomfortable but determined to keep the peace. Then the doorbell rang one final time. Ms. Martinez stood there with Leah, who was wearing her favorite blue dress and clutching a drawing. She looked nervously past me at the crowd inside. It's okay, I said softly, kneeling down. Everyone's excited to meet you. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, immediately spotting Corbin. Her face lit up as she ran to show him her drawing, a picture of all of us, including a dog she hoped we might get someday. And who might this be? Sabrina's voice cut through the moment. She had risen from her chair, studying Leah intently. Leah straightened up, meeting Sabrina's gaze with surprising steadiness. I'm Leah. I like your necklace. Something shifted in Sabrina's expression. Thank you. It was my grandmother's. Did she give it to you? Like a family thing? Yes, exactly like that. Cool. Maybe someday I'll have family things too. Leah looked at me hopefully. Right? Before I could answer, Sabrina spoke again, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You already do, dear. That drawing you're holding, that's a family thing. The tension in the room eased slightly. Leah beamed, then surprised everyone by walking over to Sabrina. Want to see it? I put you in it too. You're the one in the fancy dress, next to the dog we don't have yet. A small laugh escaped Sabrina's lips. Well, perhaps we should discuss this dog situation over dinner. I happen to know an excellent breeder. Mom, Corbin warned, but he was smiling. What? If I'm to be a grandmother, I should at least have some input on the family pet. As everyone moved toward the dining room, I caught Freddie's eye. He gave me a thumbs up, mouthing, "Told you so," before grabbing the plate of cookies to bring to the table. Maybe, just maybe, this would work after all. The dinner started peacefully enough. Leah charmed everyone with stories about her favorite books, while Sabrina maintained a polite, if reserved, demeanor. But I could feel the storm brewing beneath the surface. "So, Leah," Sabrina said during a lull in conversation, setting down her fork with precision, "tell me about your biological family." The table went silent. Leah's hand froze halfway to her mouth, her spoon trembling slightly. "Mom," Corbin warned, but Sabrina pressed on. "It's a reasonable question. We should all know what we're getting into here." "What we're getting into?" I felt my voice rising. "She's not a business investment, Sabrina." Leah put down her spoon carefully. "It's okay," she said, looking directly at Sabrina. "My first mom made some bad choices. She's in prison. My first dad left before I was born, but Danielle and Corbin chose me. That's better than being born to someone, isn't it? Being chosen?" The silence that followed was deafening. Freddie reached over and squeezed Leah's shoulder. "Being chosen," Sabrina repeated slowly, her voice taking on an edge. "Is that what you think this is? A noble rescue mission?" "That's enough." Corbin stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "No, it's not enough." Sabrina's voice rose. "This child needs professional help, not amateur parents playing house. And you two," she pointed between Corbin and me, "you're using her to spite me, to prove some point about family values." "Spite you?" I laughed incredulously. "This has nothing to do with you. We love her. She's our daughter." "She is not your daughter." Sabrina slammed her hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. "She's a troubled child with a criminal for a mother, and you're making a terrible mistake." A small sob broke through the tension. Leah had tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pushing back from the table. "I shouldn't have come." "Leah, wait." I reached for her, but she was already running toward the front door. "Now look what you've done," Sabrina huffed. "This is exactly what I meant about emotional instability." "Shut up." The words came from Corbin, shocking everyone into silence. "Just shut up, Mom. For once in your life, stop talking." I found Leah on the front porch, curled up on the swing. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and my heart broke. "I'm sorry," she said again as I sat beside her. "I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything, sweetheart. You made it better. You make everything better." Corbin appeared in the doorway, followed by Freddie and Lucille. Behind them, I could hear Sabrina's voice rising again. "If you do this, if you choose this path, then what?" Corbin turned to face his mother. "You'll disown me? Cut me off. Go ahead, because I choose them. I choose my family." Thunder rumbled overhead, perfectly punctuating his words. Sabrina's face went pale. "I've spent my whole life trying to please you," Corbin continued, "trying to live up to your expectations. But look at what your expectations have done." He gestured to Leah, still crying softly on the swing. "She's 8 years old, Mom. She's a child who needs love, not judgment. And if you can't see that, if you can't accept her, then you're the one who needs help, not her." Rain started to fall, fat drops hitting the porch roof with hollow thuds. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said, standing up. "And don't come back until you're ready to be a real grandmother." "This isn't over," Sabrina said, gathering her things. "You're making a huge mistake." "No," Leah's voice was small but clear. "They're making a family, and you're ruining it." Sabrina stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked to her car without another word. The rain was falling harder now, matching the tears on Leah's cheeks. "Did I mess up?" she asked, looking between Corbin and me. "Will she hate me forever?" "Come here," Corbin said, opening his arms. She hesitated for just a moment before running into them. "You didn't mess up anything, and no matter what happens with my mom, you're stuck with us now, okay?" She nodded against his chest. "Promise?" "Promise," we said together. Inside, Freddie was already ordering pizza. Because nobody finished dinner, and growing families need food. Lucille was cleaning up the dining room, humming softly. "Can we eat in the living room?" Leah asked hopefully. "Like a picnic?" "Absolutely," I said, watching as her smile slowly returned. "And maybe after, we can look at some paint samples for your room?" "And dog pictures," she added, making everyone laugh. As we settled in for our impromptu living room picnic, the storm raged outside, but in here, in this moment, with Leah tucked between us on the couch, everything felt exactly right. Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into, and sometimes it takes a storm to wash away the old and make room for something new to grow. "Ready?" I asked, adjusting Leah's backpack straps. Her first day of school as officially Leah Palmer had finally arrived. What if the other kids ask about my last name being different now? She fidgeted with her new pencil case. "Tell them you got upgraded," Freddie suggested, snapping pictures with his phone. Like a software update, but cooler. The adoption had been finalized yesterday, marked by tears, hugs, and enough cake to feed an army. Sabrina hadn't attended, but she'd sent a card. Progress of sorts. "There's my favorite student," Ms. Martinez called from the school entrance. She'd helped arrange Leah's transfer to this school, ensuring a smooth transition. As Leah ran to hug her former social worker, I noticed a familiar Mercedes pulling into the parking lot. Corbin tensed beside me. Sabrina stepped out, clutching a small gift bag. She looked different, less polished, more human somehow. "I found this in the attic," she said without preamble, holding out the bag to Leah. It was Corbin's first day of school gift. I thought you should have it. Inside was a worn leather bookmark engraved with the words, "Every story matters." "It's beautiful," Leah breathed, running her fingers over the letters. "Your father used to read under the covers with a flashlight," Sabrina said softly, "just like you do." "How did you know I've been talking to Ms. Martinez." Sabrina glanced at the social worker, who nodded encouragingly. "Learning about you, about adoption, about what makes a real family." The school bell rang, making us all jump. "I should go," Leah said, carefully tucking the bookmark into her favorite book. She hugged Corbin and me, then hesitated before quickly hugging Sabrina too. We watched her walk into the school, her new backpack bouncing with each step. "She looks just like you when she smiles," Sabrina said suddenly, looking at me. "Not physically, but the way her whole face lights up. That's all you." "Mom," Corbin started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish, please." She took a deep breath. "I was wrong about everything. I was so focused on bloodlines and traditions that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. A little girl who needed love, and two people with more than enough love to give. It's not that simple," I said, thinking of Leah's tears that night at dinner. "No, it's not. I have a lot to make up for. But," she pulled out another gift bag, larger this time. "Maybe we could start with this." Inside was a photo album. The first page showed Corbin at 8 years old, grinning with missing front teeth. "I thought Leah might like to see what her dad looked like at her age," Sabrina explained. "And maybe we could add new photos, create a real family album." Before anyone could respond, the school door burst open and Leah came running back out. "I forgot something," she called, racing toward us. What did you forget, sweetie? I asked, but she ran right past me to Sabrina. Thank you for the bookmark, she said, hugging her properly this time. And I'm glad you came today. Does this mean you're really my grandmother now? Sabrina's carefully applied makeup smudged as tears fell. If you'll have me. Only if you promise no more yelling, Leah said seriously. And you have to come to my room painting party this weekend. We're doing it in purple. Purple? Sabrina looked horrified for a moment before catching herself. I mean, purple is lovely. And we're getting a dog, Leah added with a mischievous grin. One step at a time, Corbin laughed, ruffling her hair. Back to class, kiddo. As Leah disappeared back into the school, Sabrina turned to us. A dog? Really? Already adopted, I admitted. We pick him up tomorrow. Let me guess. Leah chose him? Actually, Corbin smiled. He chose her, just like she chose us, just like we chose each other. Sabrina nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that chosen families might be the strongest kind. The second bell rang, and Ms. Martinez gestured that she needed to go inside. I should go too, Sabrina said. But maybe we could have dinner this weekend, after the painting party? I promised to behave. We'd like that, I said, surprising myself by meaning it. As we walked back to our cars, I spotted Leah through her classroom window. She was showing her bookmark to her seatmate, animated and happy. When she saw us, she waved enthusiastically. She's gonna be okay, isn't she? Sabrina asked softly. Better than okay, Corbin replied. She's going to be extraordinary. We all waved back at Leah, 4 very different people united by love for one remarkable little girl. Sometimes the hardest battles end not with a bang, but with a bookmark, a purple room, and the promise of new beginnings. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma works in mysterious ways, turning even the most stubborn hearts toward love.
Hey, my name's Anna. My life's kinda been one for the books, and by that I mean, it's like ripping off a band-aid, quick, kinda painful, and mostly forgettable. If you got a minute or two, pull up a chair. I've got a saga that'll make you thankful for your crazy relatives. Let's start with my so-called family. Picture a quaint little house with a white picket fence, backyard BBQs, and a family dog named Buster who's missing a few patches of fur. That's where the Norman Rockwell painting ends. Inside that picture-perfect home was my big sister, Rachel, basically the queen bee. Then there's me. I guess I was like the worker bee, just buzzing around doing my thing, barely noticed. I gotta hand it to Rachel though, she knew how to play the game. Blonde, a smile that could light up a dive bar, and a way with words that made our folks melt like a popsicle in July. She snagged everything growing up. A shiny new bike? Rachel's. The last slice of pizza? Also Rachel's. The big, fuzzy sweater I was eyeing for Christmas? You guessed it, Rachel's. And when she turned on the charm, it was game over. Mom, Dad, can I please get that dress for prom? She'd bat her eyes, and they fell for it every time. Me, though? I'd get the leftovers and the hand-me-downs. But don't get me wrong, I wasn't exactly Oliver Twist or anything. Got clothes on my back, a roof over my head, but let's just say life wasn't handing me any silver spoons. Now, my folks. Dad worked the kind of job where he came home with grease under his nails and a tired smile. Mom? She was a wizard with a spatula and a knack for sniffing out BS, unless it came from Rachel. When Rachel got into that fancy pants college with the big lawns and the ivy-covered walls, it was like Christmas came early and stayed late. Mom and Dad threw a party that could wake the dead. But by the time I was ready to start thinking about my own future, the parade had long passed. Suddenly, it was all, money's tight, Anna, and real life's about making sacrifices, you know? I remember them breaking the news, sitting at the kitchen table that had a wobbly leg. Dad was scratching the back of his neck, a sure sign he wasn't keen on the conversation. "Anna, we've been crunching the numbers, and it's just not looking good," he'd said. "You gotta be realistic, Anna," Mom piped in, stirring her coffee even though it didn't need any. "College ain't cheap. Maybe it's time you think about getting a job. You know, help out a bit." The way they danced around it, you'd think they were telling me Buster ran off to join the circus rather than just saying straight that my dreams were too expensive. So there I was, not even 18, and slapped with the reality that school was a no-go. I wasn't about to roll over and let dreams die, you know? My plan was as plain as it could be: work my fingers to the bone, save every penny, and get myself into that courtroom someday with ESQ tagged to the end of my name. The jobs I had weren't glamorous by any stretch. By day, I was slinging coffee and dodging pastry crumbs. By night, I was up to my elbows in suds, washing dishes at a diner that had seen better days. "You've gotta be the hardest working person I know, Anna," Emily said one night in our dingy little kitchen. She was a freelance graphic designer with a laugh that could light up the whole block. "Yeah," agreed Trish, who was stringing her bass guitar, getting ready for a gig with her band. "If there's anyone who can pull this off, it's you." Their words were like a pat on the back, a cheer from the sidelines that kept my feet moving. Everything was on track, maybe a bit behind schedule, but what's life without a few delays, right? Then, just like that, it all came crashing down. I woke up one morning with what I thought was a killer flu. Turns out it was way more serious. Long story short, I landed in the hospital with a stack of medical bills that looked like the Encyclopedia Britannica. "Ms. Anna, your insurance covered some of it, but..." The lady at the billing department had a voice that sounded like she was always about to deliver bad news. Which she did, big time. "You still owe quite a bit," she said, pushing a bill across the desk that made my heart sink into my sneakers. There went my college fund, swallowed up by numbers and decimal points I could barely comprehend. I tried to plead my case, get a payment plan or something. "Look, I got nothing," I told her, every part of me wanting to crawl into a hole and give up. "It's not personal, hon, it's just the system," she replied, but it sure felt personal to me. Back at our apartment, the atmosphere was as stale as the pizza we left out overnight. "There go the textbooks," I muttered, flipping through the pages of legal definitions I still hadn't memorized. We sat there, 3 dreams deferred, wrapped up in the brutal honesty of our cramped living space. "What next?" Trish asked after a silence that overstayed its welcome. I didn't have an answer, just a bunch of question marks dancing around my head. I was back to square one, but somehow it felt like I was even further behind than when I started. "Start over," I finally said. "What else can I do? I'm not cut out for giving up." It sounded good, but even I heard the quiver in my voice. Both of them nodded, but there was no hiding the worry lines etched deep into the moment. "Yeah, I understand our house is too crowded," I whispered into the phone, the words bitter as they left my mouth. Mom didn't see me swallow the lump in my throat or the way my hands shook. "You're tough, Anna. You'll figure it out." That's what Dad offered up before he handed the phone back to Mom. The bus stop bench was hard against my back. I sat there, figuring out my next move, while people with places to be rushed past me. Rachel, with her new baby and her picture-perfect life, didn't even come to the phone. Probably didn't want to catch my bad luck through the receiver. "Family, right?" the guy waiting next to me snorted, catching the tail end of my phone call. He was wearing a jacket that had seen better winters and a 5 o'clock shadow sitting at 8 o'clock. "Yeah, family," I echoed, not really in the mood to chat, but there was a solace in talking to a stranger. "Hey, don't let it beat you. You look like you've got fight in ya," he said, crinkling the paper bag in his hand. I managed a half smile. "Got any tips for sleeping on one of these seats?" I joked, but the humor didn't quite reach my eyes. He looked over, squinting as if he was sizing up the bench. Buses run all night. Ride 'em end to end. Safer than a bench. His words hung in the air as my phone buzzed with a low battery warning. Great, add that to the list of today's hits. The bus hissed as it came to a stop in front of us. Its doors yawned open, inviting us to go wherever it might take us. The guy got on the bus, finding a seat among the tired faces of nighttime commuters. I stayed back, bus fare tight in my fist, not ready to commit to just riding around in circles yet. I pulled my suitcase and started walking, the wheels drumming a lonely beat on the sidewalk. The streetlights flickered overhead, and in their stuttering light, I made a silent vow. This isn't how my story ends. Holding on to that thought, I walked through the night. Every step was a defiance, every breath a promise that I would claw my way out of this hole. Come on over, kid. Aunt Marlene's voice came through the other end like it was pulling me out of quicksand. I never thought I'd be so happy to hear that raspy tone of hers. When I got to her place, she didn't waste time on pleasantries or useless small talk. You look like hell, was her greeting as she ushered me in, her hand firm on my back. I spent the first few days in her guest room, trying to piece myself back together. She didn't press me for details. She wasn't the type for cozy heart-to-hearts, but I could tell she was waiting for me to start talking. Finally, as we sat at her cluttered kitchen table, flanked by plants that seemed as tough as she was, Aunt Marlene set down her mug and looked at me with those piercing eyes. What do you want, Anna? Really want? It made me nervous, like I was on one of those makeover shows, and this was the big reveal. But I was too tired to beat around the bush. I want to be a lawyer, Aunt Marlene. My voice carried an edge of desperation I could no longer hide. She nodded, as if she already knew it. If that's the case, she started, tapping her fingers on the table, the clinking sound mingling with the tick-tock of the wall clock. I'll pay for your education. My heart jolted like it got hit by a punch of hope. You serious? As a heart attack. But, she raised her finger, slicing the air with her condition. You keep your grades up. No slacking. Her words were stern, yet there was a spark in her eyes, telling me she believed in me. Really? I couldn't help the grin that broke through, wide as the ocean. Really? I didn't scrim and save just to blow my money on bingo and whiskey. I stood up and hugged her, tight, the words, thank you, getting crushed between us. Now, none of that mushy stuff, she grumbled, but she patted my back, before shooing me off. And you're gonna work for me, part-time. I need more help around here than I care to admit. What kind of work? I was eager, ready to do just about anything. The kind that needs doing, she replied vaguely, with a dismissive wave of her hand. We'll start with that jungle you call a hairdo, and move on to the yard work tomorrow. I laughed. It was a hearty, genuine sound I hadn't heard from myself in a while. Deal. Don't think I'm just being nice, Aunt Marlene warned. You fall off, get lazy, and the deal's off. I shook my head, the seriousness settling back in. Won't happen. She eyed me for a long moment, then smiled. Good. Now, help me with these damn plants. They've got a better social life than I do. I spent the rest of the day covered in soil, pruning and watering, but the dirt never felt so good on my hands. Aunt Marlene made me work for every penny she was offering, but that was okay. The college days weren't a walk in the park. Aunt Marlene hooked me up big time, but the balance between the books and bills was like juggling knives, drop one, and it could cut deep. I'd blink open in the mornings after cramming civil procedure, with my alarm buzzing like a bee in a jar. Books spread across the desk like a buffet I didn't want to dig into. When my stomach grumbled, reminding me I was a human who needed fuel, I'd make a run to the nearest food joint on campus. Regular? Lily, who manned the counter, would ask with a knowing look as I approached. Make it a double. Long night ahead, I'd say. She'd pass over the coffee and sandwich. You're going to burn out if you keep at it like this. Can't burn out when you're on fire. I'd quip, even though I felt more like kindling than a blaze. Nights turned into a blur of flashcards and frayed nerves. Whenever my phone buzzed, it was either a reminder for an unpaid bill or a message from Aunt Marlene asking how my day went. I always told her better than it actually was. Then things changed overnight. Aunt Marlene got real sick, like life-taking sick. I squeezed her hand more times than I could count in that too-quiet hospital room. I couldn't say much. What do you say when the person who's your rock is crumbling? So, who's going to yell at me for eating cookies in bed when you're gone? I tried to joke in one of those visits, struggling to keep it light. You better not. She'd rasp, voice a whisper. Crumbs everywhere. We never talked about the money. It was like a silent agreement, the elephant in the room wearing a tutu nobody wanted to comment on. After she passed, I sat in that stiff lawyer's office, more nervous than I ever was for any exam. When the lawyer, a stiff man with a comb-over and glasses sliding down his nose, said, "She's left you the house, Anna," it was like Aunt Marlene was still looking out for me. She what? I blinked, gears in my head grinding to a halt. The house. And, he fiddled with papers. A considerable amount for your student debts, the rest, well, it's for you to figure out. Marlene was clear about making your own way. Despite the knot in my throat, I asked, "Did she say anything else?" "Just that she believed in you." He adjusted his glasses. "And that she'd haunt you if you gave up." I laughed through the tears. That was Aunt Marlene, all right. Leaving the office that day, I felt heavier and lighter at the same time. She gave me a legacy, not just in bricks and mortar, but in the belief that I could finish this last lap without her. I was neck-deep in prep for the next big exam when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, the kind that tell you this ain't gonna be a friendly how do you do. Pushing open the front door of Aunt Marlene's, my house, there they stood. Mom, Dad, Rachel, and her husband Dave, like some grim reunion. Rachel wasted no time. Her eyes hungry like she was window shopping. "Anna, look at us, all together again in this huge place. Like a twisted sitcom, ain't it?" I drawled, leaning against the doorframe. "Anna," Dad started in that tone, the kind that said, "Sit down, shut up, we've decided. We've been talking. This house should be for Rachel. She's got kids, a family." I raised my brows, incredulity playing on my face. "No kidding?" Sarcasm heavy as an anchor. "Wrong house for that chat, then." Mom's lips tightened, a sure sign she was ramping up to a guilt trip. "You'll understand when you have your own family. This is just practical." I must have missed the part where practical meant kicking me out of my own home. I shot back, crossing my arms. Rachel chimed in, batting her eyelashes at me, then eyeing Dave for support, who just shrugged like he always did when she was shopping for a yes man. "Sweetie, this house is wasted on you. We could give it life, laughter, children running around." And what, turn Aunt Marlene's parlor into a romper room? The idea felt like acid on my tongue. "There's no need to be rude," Dave mumbled, finally finding words. "Right, because showing up to claim my house is peak civility," I snapped. "You're being selfish, Anna," Dad grunted, convinced of his own righteousness. My laughter was bitter. Selfish? After years of keeping her in your thoughts during birthday cards? Convenient memory you got there. They shuffled, uneasy. This ain't how they imagined their gold digging would go. "Anna," Mom softened her voice, the final play voice. "Think of the family." I matched her tone. "I see now. I am the part of the family that actually gave a damn." A standoff silence settled between us. The kind that's heavy and feels like it's stuffed with cotton. Rachel broke it, predictably. "You can be such a..." "Don't," I warned. "Just leave, all of you." As they filed out the same door they came in, burdened by their disbelief and entitlement, Dad turned to me. "You'll regret this." I stood tall, looking him square in the eye. "The only thing I'll regret is not changing the locks sooner." The door shut behind them, and the silence was mine again. This unwelcome throwback was closed. Inheritance or not, I was keeping Aunt Marlene's legacy, not auctioning it off to the highest bidder in my bloodline. I was beat. The kind of tired that sticks to your bones. Pulling into the driveway after a double shift at the law firm could do that to a person. All I wanted was a hot shower and my bed. As I jammed my key into the lock, it just ground against metal, not budging. "What the?" I muttered, fiddling with the key. That's when the door swung open. Rachel stood there, little Mia on her hip, and a cocky tilt to her lips. "Changed the locks, Anna." "Surprise!" My eyebrows shot up. "Like hell you did. This is my house." "Not anymore," she said, bouncing Mia, who seemed blissfully unaware of the adult drama. Anger bubbled up hot and volatile. "Watch me," I shot back, already dialing. Her smirk wavered. "You're bluffing." With the dispatcher on the line, Rachel's confidence slipped another notch. "Yes, my sisters illegally entered and changed the locks on my house," I explained loudly into the phone. Dad's truck pulled into the driveway just as I hung up. Him and Mom got out, tag-teaming like this was some sort of intervention. "Anna, be reasonable," Mom started, her eyes moist as if she were in a soap opera. "I'm past reasonable," I said, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. Dave stepped up to me, a good foot taller, trying to look menacing. "Come on, Anna," he said, voice low. "Don't make a scene." I held up my phone with the recording button clearly on. "Say that again, Dave? For the camera?" His face turned the color of sour milk. Sirens cut through the heavy air as a cop car pulled into view. They stepped out, all stern looks and business. "What seems to be the problem here?" one officer asked. Their bravado crumbled like stale bread. Dad's voice lost a few decibels. "It's a misunderstanding, officers. Family matter." "Stealing my home's a bit more than a family matter," I said, crossing my arms. The officers looked between us, taking in the scene. They were good at this, shifting gears as the situation unfolded. "All right, let's start with some ID, and we'll go from there," one of them said, pulling out a notepad. Reluctantly, Rachel handed Mia to Mom and dug into her purse. The legal tango had begun. They asked questions, we gave answers. Dad and Mom put on a show, but the deed to the house was in my name, signed and sealed by Aunt Marlene's will. "Can you prove you live here, ma'am?" the officer asked me. "Better. I can prove I own it," I said, reaching for my briefcase in the car. The sight of Aunt Marlene's will felt like the first deep breath I'd taken since stepping out of that damn car. The officers read it, their eyebrows lifting and dipping as they took in the legalese. "Seems clear to us," the officer said, folding the papers back into the briefcase. "I suggest you hand over a set of keys to Miss here. Otherwise, we will have to proceed with charges for breaking and entering, and unlawful eviction." Like pulling teeth, Rachel gave up a set of keys. Mom and Dad hushed up quick, and Dave, well, he looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. The cops escorted them off the property. Mom shot me a look like I'd kicked her kitten, but the law was the law, no room for sob stories. The door closed behind me with a click like the final word in an argument. I leaned against it, the rush of adrenaline making my hands shake. Exhausted, I slouched into the kitchen to make a much-needed cup of coffee. As the kettle boiled, I thought about what my next move should be. The hefty click of the final lock snapping into place felt like the end of a long, bad joke. My house, now fortress, needed just one more thing to be perfect. "Maybe I'll get a big, nasty dog," I muttered to nobody in particular. I wasn't much of a pet person, but the thought of some drooling monster that could scare off any would-be family intrusions brought a smirk to my face. Weeks dripped by. The silence from my family's end was louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. No calls, not even a lousy text. Sometimes, deep in the night when the work was done and the quiet was too much, I'd find myself on Rachel's social media page. She had a knack for the dramatic, photos of the kids, all sad eyes and pouty lips, captions nipping at my conscience. Little Timmy sure wishes he had a yard to play in. And Mia's third birthday without Auntie Anna. I'd chuckle every time. Did she think I had amnesia? That I'd forget why I stood my ground and take pity? I remember the days when I begged for money to pay for my studies, and all I got were fancy speeches about responsibility and tough love. I can still feel the cold slamming of the door when I was broke and recovering, and they told me they had no room. The way my own bedrock, my foundation, crumbled to dust beneath me. Nah, my new life was my making. My dues paid in full, my battles fought with no one in my corner. No amount of puppy-eyed pictures would change the history they wish I'd forget. I thought about posting a reply once, something snappy and a bit mean, but why bother? I had work to catch up on, a stack of files on my table that didn't give a damn about family feuds. I had clients who depended on me, and that was the reality I chose to engage with. Sometimes late into the evening, I'd pour myself some bourbon, neat, and sit in my backyard, the backyard they wanted to take from me, and I'd savor the quiet. I'd think about that guard dog again, a big one with a bark that would make my folks think twice before stepping onto the porch. Maybe a Rottweiler, or a Mastiff, something with bite. My phone stayed quiet, a dead limb I'd long since learned to function without. And when I'd finally hit the sack, I'd sleep the sleep of the just, or the wicked, I didn't care which. No ghosts of guilt to disturb my rest, no restless wondering about what-ifs. Just the peace of knowing that from the four walls around me to the roof over my head, it was all mine, through and through. The last thing I remember every night was the faint idea of getting that dog. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But the choice was mine, and that was good enough for me. My name is Audrey. A year back, life sucker punched us. Our little boy, our 9-year-old Mikey, lost his battle with leukemia. My husband, Mark, a factory engineer, and I, an economist, were left grappling with a loss too immense to comprehend. Mikey wasn't just our son, he was our sunshine, our hope, our joy. He was a spitfire, full of life and laughter, even when the illness tried to dim his light. He'd look at us with his big, brave eyes, and say, "I'm gonna beat this, Mom. You watch." And we believed him, because he was our little warrior. I remember the day he was diagnosed. We were in the doctor's office, holding onto each other and onto hope. The doctor, with a grave face, told us, "I'm sorry, it's leukemia." The room went quiet. It felt like the air had been sucked out of it. Mark was the first to break the silence. "We'll fight it," he said, his voice firm. "We'll do whatever it takes." And fight we did. The days turned into a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and countless prayers. Mikey, bless his heart, fought like a champ. He'd throw up, cry from the pain, but then wipe his tears and say, "Is that all you got, cancer?" But the disease was relentless. It took away his energy, his laughter, his hair, but not his spirit. He'd lay in his hospital bed, frail and tired, but still managed to give us a thumbs up. "I'm good, Dad. I'm good," he'd say, trying to reassure us. The day we lost him, Mark and I were at home. We'd been waiting for a call from the hospital. The phone rang, and Mark picked it up. His face went white. He didn't have to say anything. I knew. Our little warrior was gone. Mark finally found his voice. He's gone, Audrey," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I remember collapsing onto the floor, Mark holding me as we cried. For months, our house felt like a tomb, silent and cold. I spent days in bed, lost in my grief. Mark tried to keep it together, for both of us. He'd go to work, come back, and hold me as I cried. One day, I found him in Mikey's room, holding his favorite action figure. He was crying, his body shaking with sobs. I sat next to him, and we mourned together. We mourned for our boy, for the life he could have had, for the dreams that would never come true. After we lost our Mikey, I was stuck in a dark place. It felt like I was trapped in a never-ending tunnel with no light at the end. But Mark, my husband, he refused to let me sink. He was hurting too, but he put on a brave face, for me, for us. Every morning, he'd gently shake me awake. "Audrey, time to rise and shine," he'd say. I'd just grunt, pulling the duvet over my head. I wanted to hide, to escape the harsh reality that our boy was no longer with us. But Mark, he was relentless. He'd sit on the edge of the bed, his hand finding mine under the covers. "We gotta keep movin', Audrey. For Mikey," he'd say. His voice was always steady, but I could hear the underlying pain. So, I started getting up. It felt like moving mountains, you know? The world outside seemed too harsh, too real. Every little thing reminded me of Mikey. But I pushed through the pain. I started doing simple things. Cooking breakfast, washing clothes. They were just everyday chores, but they kept me anchored, stopped me from losing myself in grief. Mark and we started taking walks in the evening. We'd walk hand in hand, mostly in silence. Sometimes, we'd talk about Mikey. Remember the time Mikey tried to make pancakes and nearly burnt the house down? Mark would chuckle, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. We'd laugh together, and for a fleeting moment, the crushing weight of grief would lift. One day, out of the blue, Mark brought home a puppy. A golden retriever, the kind Mikey always begged us for. "Thought this little guy might help," he said, his eyes pleading for my approval. I was startled. I didn't know if I was ready for another living being in our life, another soul to love and potentially lose. But I looked into the puppy's innocent eyes, and my heart melted. We named him Buddy. He was a bundle of energy, always scampering around, gnawing at our shoes. But he brought a sense of life back into our home. His playful barks and whimpers filled the deafening silence that had settled since Mikey's departure. In a strange way, Buddy helped us heal. He gave us something to focus on, a distraction from our pain. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy. There were days when the grief was so overwhelming, I felt like I was drowning. But then I'd look at Mark, at Buddy, and I'd find a shred of strength to keep going. I found courage in their love, in their resilience. Living without Mikey was something I couldn't have ever imagined. But we were doing it, one agonizing day at a time. We were finding strength in each other, in the memories of our beautiful boy. We were learning to live with our loss, finding small moments of happiness amidst the sorrow. It was a slow, painful process, but we were making progress. Finding strength after losing a part of your soul, it's not easy. It's a battle, an uphill one, but it's a battle worth fighting. Because when all is said and done, life goes on. And we need to move with it, no matter how painful it is. For us, for our Mikey. Because that's what he would have wanted. He was our little warrior, and we needed to honor his memory by living, by finding strength in our loss. "Hey, Audrey," Mark began, breaking the silence. We were sat on the porch, just watching the sun go down, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves. Buddy was off somewhere, probably digging another hole in the yard. "I've been thinkin'." I turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah?" I asked, waiting for him to continue. Mark was always a man of few words, so when he said he'd been thinking, it usually meant something serious. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I've been thinkin' about us having another kid," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I just stared at him, unable to process his words. Another kid? Was he out of his mind? We'd lost our Mikey, and he was talking about having another child? "Are you crazy, Mark?" I finally blurted out, my heart pounding in my chest. We can't just replace Mikey." Mark shook his head quickly. "No, Audrey, I don't mean replace. God, I could never. I miss it, Audrey. I miss being a dad. I miss our family." I could see the pain in his eyes, the longing. I understood what he was saying. I missed being a mom too. I missed the laughter, the chaos, the love. But the thought of having another child, it scared me. It felt like a betrayal to Mikey. I don't know, Mark, I said, my voice shaky. It feels like we'd be betraying Mikey. Mark reached out, taking my hands in his. Audrey, we could never betray Mikey. He'll always be our son, our firstborn. But I believe we have more love to give. And I think Mikey would want us to be happy. His words hit me hard. I knew he was right. Mikey wouldn't want us to live in sorrow forever. He would want us to move on, to find happiness again. But the thought of loving another child, it was terrifying. I'm scared, Mark, I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. I'm scared of loving another child, scared of losing another one. Mark squeezed my hands, his eyes filled with understanding. I'm scared too, Audrey. But I think we can do this. For us, for Mikey. We sat there, holding hands, as the sun set. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my response. And after what felt like an eternity, I finally found my voice. Okay, Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Let's do it. Let's have another child. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with relief and joy. Really, Audrey? He asked, his voice choked with emotion. I nodded, squeezing his hand. Yeah, Mark. Let's give it a shot. And that was it. We decided to try for another child. It was a scary decision, but it felt right. We had love to give, and we wanted to be parents again. But most importantly, we wanted to honor Mikey. We wanted to live again, to find happiness. For us, for Mikey. The smell of Mary's famous roast chicken and baked potatoes was wafting through the house. Bill, Mark's dad, was at the head of the table, carving the chicken with a surgeon's precision. Mark's sister, Linda, her husband, Bob, and their son, John, were also there. Now, Linda was always a bit of a loose cannon. She had this way of saying the most outrageous things without batting an eyelid. Tonight, she was in full form. Leaning back in her chair, she was holding court, her voice loud and clear, her laughter ringing out. She was holding a glass of red wine in her hand, waving it around as she spoke, drops of wine occasionally splashing onto the tablecloth. We were halfway through the meal, just making small talk, when Linda turned to Mark and me. So, Audrey, Mark, she began, a smirk on her face. I've been thinking about Mikey's college fund. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. Mikey's college fund. It was something Mark's grandma had set up for him when he was born. It was supposed to be for his future, for his education. But Mikey was gone. Linda, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, continued, well, since Mikey isn't going to use it, I thought maybe John could have it. I felt like the world had stopped spinning. I just stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. She wanted us to give Mikey's college fund to John? I glanced at Mark, but he seemed just as shell-shocked as I was. Linda, oblivious to our shock, went on, I mean, John's starting college next year. And it's not like Mikey's gonna need it, right? The room fell silent. I could see Mary and Bill exchanging worried glances, while Bob just stared at his plate. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking. I was furious, but also hurt. How could Linda be so heartless, so selfish? I felt a lump in my throat, and tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. But I swallowed hard, forcing them back. I wasn't going to give Linda the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Linda, I said, my voice shaking, that money was for Mikey. It's not yours to give away. Linda just shrugged, a smug smile on her face. Well, it's not like Mikey's gonna use it, is he? She retorted. I was speechless. I just stared at her, my mind a whirl of emotions. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her how wrong she was. But I was too stunned, too hurt. Linda, that was low, even for you. I finally managed to say, my voice choked with emotion. That was cruel and inappropriate. Linda just shrugged again, feigning innocence. What? I'm just being practical here, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I barely remember what was said, what was eaten. All I could think about was Linda's words, her audacity. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her take Mikey's college fund. It was his, and it would always be his. No matter what Linda said. After that bombshell dinner, Mark and I found ourselves in the sanctuary of our home, both of us still reeling from Linda's audacious proposition. The night was still, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mark was slumped on the couch, his face buried in his hands. I was pacing the room, my mind racing. Can you believe her, Mark? I exploded, my voice echoing in the quiet room. The nerve of that woman. Mark didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, his shoulders hunched. Finally, he looked up at me, his face pale. I know, Audrey, he said, his voice heavy. I can't believe it either. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of Linda's words hanging in the air. Finally, I spoke up. We can't let her have Mikey's money, Mark, I said, my voice firm. It's not hers to take. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, Audrey, he said. And we won't. That money was for Mikey. It's his. But she doesn't see it that way, I retorted, my voice rising. She just sees it as free money. Mark reached out, taking my hand in his. Audrey, we can't let her get to us, he said, his voice steady. We know what's right. And we'll fight for it. I nodded, biting my lip. You're right, Mark, I said, my voice shaky. We can't let her win. Mark squeezed my hand, giving me a small smile. And besides, he added, his voice soft. That money will be useful when we have our own baby. I felt a pang in my heart at his words. We had been trying for a baby for a while now, with no luck. But his words gave me hope. Just then, my phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, my heart pounding. It was Bob, Linda's husband. Audrey, I'm sorry, he said, his voice apologetic. I didn't know Linda was going to say that. I don't agree with her. His words were a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. I thanked him, my voice shaky, and hung up. The morning after Linda's outrageous proposition, I was still fuming. The audacity of that woman. I'd always known that she was selfish, but this was a new low, even for her. I decided to do some digging. If Linda was willing to stoop so low as to ask for Mikey's money, who knew what else she was capable of? I fired up my laptop and logged into Facebook. I cringed as I typed Linda's name into the search bar. I hadn't visited her profile in years, and for good reason. The woman was insufferable, but this was important. I needed to know what she was up to. As I scrolled through her profile, my blood began to boil. There she was, flaunting her new designer clothes, her expensive jewelry, her lavish vacations. And there, in the comments, were our mutual friends, gushing over her extravagant lifestyle. I decided to reach out to one of them, a woman named Susan who I'd always liked. She was down to earth and honest, and I trusted her. I sent her a message, asking her about Linda's recent spending spree. Oh, Audrey, she replied, her words appearing on my screen. You have no idea. Linda's been living it up. She's been spending money like there's no tomorrow. I felt a knot in my stomach. But what about John's college fund? I asked. Isn't she worried about that? Susan's reply was immediate. Audrey, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Linda's already spent all that money. On herself. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Linda had spent John's college fund? On herself? I couldn't believe it. But then again, maybe I could. This was Linda we were talking about, after all. I thanked Susan for her honesty and logged off. I felt sick to my stomach. Linda had spent all of John's money, and now she wanted Mikey's. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. I sat there, staring at my screen, my mind racing. I was furious, but more than that, I was determined. Linda had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I picked up my phone and dialed Mark's number. "Mark," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk. It's about Linda." Mark was silent for a moment. Then, he spoke, his voice grim. "What's she done now, Audrey?" I took a deep breath. "She spent all of John's college fund, Mark," I said. "On herself." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I can't believe it," Mark said, his voice shaky. "That's selfish. I can't believe she'd do something like that." "I know, Mark," I replied, my voice calm. "But we can't let her get away with it. We need to stop her. For Mikey." There was a long pause. Then, Mark spoke, his voice resolute. "You're right, Audrey," he said. "We need to stop her." As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of determination. Linda had shown her true colors, and they were ugly. But we weren't going to let her win. Not this time. Not ever. I called up Mark's folks and told them to drop everything and meet me at their house. The atmosphere was as thick as pea soup when I walked into their living room. I took a deep breath and spilled the beans. "Linda's blown all of John's college cash," I said, my voice shaky. "On herself." Mark's dad, a big burly guy who usually had a smile on his face, looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "That rotten," he snarled, his voice echoing through the room. Mark's mom, a sweet old lady who always had a kind word for everyone, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Our own daughter," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could she?" Mark, who'd been as quiet as a mouse, finally piped up. "We ain't gonna let her get away with this," he said, his voice as hard as nails. "We're gonna fight her on this." The very next day, I was at home when I heard a loud bang on the door. It was Linda, her face red as a beetroot. "You ratted me out," she hissed, her eyes blazing like a wildfire. "You told them about the dough." "I did," I said, standing my ground. "That money wasn't yours, Linda. It was for John's schooling, not for you to blow on fancy clothes and shoes." Linda's face turned an ugly shade of purple. "You're gonna pay for this," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll wish you never crossed me." With that, she stormed off, leaving me shaking in my boots. I knew then that Linda meant business. But I also knew that I couldn't back down. Not now. A couple of days later, I went to visit Mikey's grave. As I got closer, I noticed something was off. The flowers I'd left were trampled, and the small angel statue I'd placed by the headstone was smashed to bits. My heart sank. I knew who'd done this. I immediately called the cops. They showed up in no time and started poking around. After a while, they told me they'd found some footage from the security cameras at the cemetery. It was Linda. She was the one who'd trashed Mikey's grave. I called Mark, my voice trembling with rage. "Mark," I said, "Linda's desecrated Mikey's grave." There was a pause on the other end. Then, Mark spoke, his voice colder than a winter's night. That witch," he said. "I can't believe she'd stoop so low." "We gotta do something, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "We can't let her keep doing this to us." As I put down the phone, I felt a surge of determination. Linda had shown just how far she was willing to go. But we weren't about to let her get away with it. We were gonna fight her, every step of the way. For Mikey. For John. For all of us. After Linda's nasty stunt, we gave her the cold shoulder. No more Sunday dinners, no more family gatherings. She was out, plain and simple. Even her own husband, Bob, couldn't stand the sight of her. He served her the divorce papers quicker than you can say Jack Robinson. It was a bitter pill for him to swallow, his own wife turning out to be such a snake in the grass. The fallout from Linda's betrayal was like a bomb going off in our lives. But it also brought me and Mark closer. We were in the same boat, dealing with the same pain. We leaned on each other, helped each other through the tough times. We became more than just in-laws. We became allies, friends. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. We slowly but surely picked up the pieces. We were a team, and nothing could break us. Not Linda. Not her betrayal. Nothing. One day, I went to visit Mikey's grave. It was a sunny day, and the cemetery was peaceful. I sat down next to his headstone, feeling a strange sense of calm. "Hey, Mikey," I said softly. "I miss you, kiddo. But I want you to know we're doing okay. We're sticking together, just like you'd want." I felt a soft breeze on my face, like a gentle caress. I smiled. "I know you're watching over us, Mikey. We'll make you proud." As I walked away from the cemetery, I felt a sense of peace. We had been through hell and back, but we were still standing. We were stronger than ever. And we were ready to face whatever life had in store for us. And then, in the midst of all this chaos, I found out I was expecting. When I told my husband, his face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Audrey," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "this is the best news I've heard in a long time." I smiled at him, my heart swelling with love. "I thought you'd be happy." He pulled me into his arms, his eyes shining. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, Audrey. This is a miracle, a blessing." He paused, deep in thought. "The money we plan to spend on Mikey's education, we'll use it for our unborn child. We'll give him the best life possible." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I think Mikey would have wanted that. As we sat there, planning for the future, I felt a sense of hope. Despite everything, we were moving forward. We were turning our pain into something positive. And I knew, deep down, that we were going to be okay. We were going to make it. Together. I remember the day Veronica came into our lives. It was about a year after Mom passed away. Dad was still a bit lost, moving through life like he was walking in a fog. Then Veronica showed up, all smiles and sweet words. Dad thought she was a blessing. I wasn't so sure. "Hey, Pumpkin," Dad said one evening, his voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "I want you to meet someone special. This is Veronica." I looked up from my coloring book, eyeing the tall woman standing beside him. She had this big, bright smile, but her eyes didn't match it. They were like little calculators, sizing me up. "Hello, sweetie." Veronica knelt down to my level, her voice too sugary. "I've heard so much about you. Your dad tells me you're the smartest little girl in town." I just nodded, not sure what to say. Dad looked at me, his eyes begging for approval. "Isn't she great, Dakota?" "Yeah, she's nice," I mumbled, turning back to my coloring. I wasn't good at lying, even then. The first few weeks were okay. Dad seemed happier, and Veronica tried to play the part of the caring stepmom. But then I started noticing things. Like how she'd be all nice when Dad was around, but cold and distant when it was just us. One day, she came home with a bunch of shopping bags. "I got you some new clothes, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake kindness. "I know how fast kids your age grow." I was excited at first, until I tried them on. Everything was way too big. The sleeves hung past my hands, and the pants pulled around my feet. I looked like I was wearing someone else's clothes. "Dad, look," I said when he got home, showing him the oversized clothes. "Veronica got them for me, but they're too big." He just chuckled and ruffled my hair. "She's thinking ahead, honey. You'll grow into them. It's smart shopping." I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't smart, it was weird. But I didn't. I knew it would just make him sad. School became a nightmare after that. Kids can be mean, and they latched onto my baggy clothes like sharks. "Hey, Scarecrow," they'd shout as I walked by. "Where's the rest of your farm?" I tried to tell Veronica, to ask for clothes that fit. but she just waved it off. "Kids are cruel," she said, not even looking up from her magazine. "You need to toughen up." That's how it went for months. Dad was in his own world, happy with Veronica, and I was just there. The girl with the two big clothes and a stepmom who couldn't care less. "Veronica, can we get some clothes that fit me better?" I asked one day, trying to sound brave. "The kids at school make fun of me." She looked at me, her eyes cold. "You need to learn to be grateful," she snapped. "I'm doing my best here. You could at least try to appreciate it." I didn't know what to say to that. It felt like no matter what I did, it was wrong. I was wrong. That night, I heard them talking. Dad was saying how great Veronica was with me, how lucky we were to have her. I wanted to scream, to tell him she wasn't great, she wasn't even nice. But I didn't. I just lay there in bed, feeling small and alone, listening to them laugh and talk in the kitchen. I remember this one morning, Dad had to leave early for work. He kissed my forehead, saying, "Dakota, be good for Veronica, okay?" I nodded, though inside, I was dreading another day alone with her. As soon as the door closed, Veronica's smile vanished. "Get dressed. We're going shopping," she said, her voice sharp. In the car, I tried to make conversation. "Can we get some jeans? Maybe a few tops that fit?" She glanced at me, her eyes cold. "You'll wear what I buy, and you'll be thankful. Got it?" At the store, it was the same old story. She picked out clothes that were way too big. When I protested, she snapped, "Stop whining. You're lucky I'm spending money on you at all." Back at home, I tried to alter the clothes to fit better. Veronica caught me and lost it. "What do you think you're doing? Ruining perfectly good clothes." "I'm just trying to make them fit," I mumbled. "You're ungrateful. Do you know how many kids would kill to have a stepmom like me?" I wanted to say, "Not many, I bet." But I kept quiet. Arguing with Veronica was like talking to a brick wall. A few weeks later, she joined the school parent council. It was her new stage, and she played her part perfectly. I overheard her talking to other parents at a school event, her voice dripping with fake concern. "It's so hard, raising someone else's child," she sighed. "But I just love her like my own." The other parents ate it up. "You're such a saint," one of them said. "Taking on such a big responsibility." I felt sick listening to her. At home, it was a different story. If I left a cup on the table or forgot to make my bed, she'd go off. "Look at this mess. Your mother would be ashamed." One night, I tried to talk to Dad about it. "Veronica's different when you're not around," I said, hoping he'd listen. He shook his head, a tired look on his face. "She's doing her best, honey. You need to give her a chance." "But Dad." "No buts. She's your stepmom now. You need to respect her." It was like talking to a statue. Dad wouldn't hear a word against Veronica. I felt so alone, like I was trapped in a nightmare and couldn't wake up. Life with Veronica was like walking on eggshells, never knowing when she'd snap. I was counting down the days until I could leave for college and start my own life. But then, everything changed again. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. Dad was rushing around, getting ready for work, and I was trying to avoid Veronica's morning mood. Suddenly, Dad clutched his chest, his face twisted in pain. "Dad!" I screamed, rushing to him. Veronica came running in, her usual mask of concern back in place. "What's happening?" "I don't know, he's in pain." I was panicking, tears streaming down my face. Veronica was on the phone in seconds, calling for an ambulance. But it was too late. Dad was gone before they even got there. The next few days were a blur. Relatives I hadn't seen in years came pouring in, offering their condolences. Veronica was the grieving widow, perfectly playing her part. She'd cry on cue, telling everyone how much she loved Dad, how she didn't know how she'd manage without him. At the funeral, She gave a eulogy that would have won an Oscar. He was the love of my life, she sobbed into the microphone. And I will miss him every day. I stood there, numb, watching this performance. I wanted to shout, to tell everyone it was all an act. But I couldn't. I just stood there, feeling more alone than ever. After the funeral, once everyone had left, Veronica's mask slipped. We were alone in the house, just the two of us. She turned to me, her eyes cold and hard. Now that your father's gone, things are going to change around here, she said, her voice low and menacing. You're going to learn to respect me. I was still in shock from Dad's death, and her words felt like a slap in the face. What are you talking about? I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't play dumb with me, Dakota, she hissed. Your father's not here to protect you anymore. And I'm not going to put up with your attitude. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father had just died, and all she could think about was herself. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice shaking with anger. He was your husband. How can you be so cold? She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Oh, please. Your father was a means to an end, nothing more. And now that he's gone, I'm in charge. You'd do well to remember that. I stared at her, feeling a mix of rage and despair. She was right about one thing, Dad wasn't here to protect me anymore. I was on my own with this woman who saw me as nothing but a nuisance. Life with Veronica after Dad's death was unbearable. She turned the house into a prison, and I was the unwilling inmate. I knew I had to get out, but I didn't know how. That's when Aunt Lucy stepped in. One evening, Aunt Lucy came over. She was Dad's younger sister, a feisty woman with a no-nonsense attitude. She had heard about Dad's passing and came to see how I was doing. But when she saw the way Veronica treated me, she was furious. This is no way to treat a child, Veronica, Aunt Lucy said, her voice stern and unwavering. Veronica just rolled her eyes. She's not a child anymore, Lucy. She needs to learn discipline. Aunt Lucy wasn't having any of it. Discipline? Is that what you call this? She's practically a prisoner in her own home. I remember sitting there, watching them argue, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. Aunt Lucy was taking my side, something no one else had done since Dad died. Listen, Veronica, I'm not going to stand by and watch you treat her like this, Aunt Lucy continued. She's coming with me. Veronica laughed, a cold, cruel sound. And what makes you think you have any say in this? I'm her guardian now. Aunt Lucy's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. I'm not going to let you ruin her life. That night, Aunt Lucy took me to her place. It was a small, cozy house, nothing like the cold, imposing one I'd been living in with Veronica. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. You're going to stay with me from now on, Aunt Lucy said, sitting me down at her kitchen table. I've spoken to a lawyer. We're going to fight for your custody. I was overwhelmed. But Veronica said she's my guardian. Aunt Lucy shook her head. She may be your guardian for now, but that doesn't mean it's permanent. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. The legal battle was tough. Veronica fought tooth and nail to keep me, not because she cared, but because she wanted control. But Aunt Lucy was a fighter, and she had a good lawyer. After months of back and forth, the court finally awarded custody to Aunt Lucy. Moving in with Aunt Lucy was like stepping into a new world. She was kind and caring, the complete opposite of Veronica. She encouraged me to pursue my interests and supported me in everything I did. Life's too short to be miserable, she'd say. You've got to find what makes you happy and go for it. I took her advice to heart. I started doing better in school, made new friends, and began to feel like a normal teenager again. Aunt Lucy was more than just a guardian, she was a mentor, a friend, a beacon of light in the darkness that had been my life. Living with Aunt Lucy gave me the stability and love I needed to heal from the years of neglect and emotional abuse I'd suffered under Veronica. For the first time, I started looking forward to the future, dreaming about what I could become. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a new life, and I was determined to make the most of it. Years had passed since I last saw Veronica. I was now working at a reputable firm, forging my own path. The past seemed like a distant memory until one ordinary day, my phone rang, displaying an unknown number. Dakota Harrison speaking, I answered, expecting a routine work call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, clinical. Hello, Ms. Harrison, this is Nurse Jenkins from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your mother. She's been admitted here. A wave of confusion hit me. My mother passed away years ago, I corrected, my voice tinged with surprise. The nurse quickly clarified, I apologize for the confusion. I meant your stepmother. She's listed you as her next of kin. My mind raced. Why would Veronica list me? After everything? What happened to her? I asked, a mix of curiosity and old resentment bubbling up. She's had a serious fall and requires surgery. She's been asking to see you, the nurse explained. I was torn, a whirlwind of emotions clouding my judgment. I'll think about it, I said, ending the call. That evening, I shared the news with Aunt Lucy. Her reaction was a mix of concern and disbelief. Why would she ask for you after all this time, and after all she did? I don't know, I replied, feeling a turmoil of emotions. Part of me wants to see if she's changed. But another part of me remembers the pain she caused. Aunt Lucy gave me a reassuring look. You don't owe her anything, Dakota. Remember that. The next day, driven by a strange sense of closure, I found myself at the hospital. Walking into Veronica's room felt like stepping into a forgotten world. She looked frail, a shadow of the formidable figure she once was. Her eyes brightened when she saw me. Dakota, my dear, you came. Veronica's voice was weak, but laced with the same old theatricality. I'm here because I was curious, I stated plainly, maintaining a distance. Dakota, I know I wasn't the best to you, but deep down, I've always loved you, she said, her voice quivering. I looked at her skeptically. The years hadn't softened my memories. Loved me? You have a strange way of showing it. Veronica reached out, her hand trembling. I made mistakes, but I am alone now. I need help, and you're all I have left. Her words, meant to tug at heartstrings, left me cold. You're alone because of the choices you made, Veronica, not because of circumstances. She persisted, her eyes pleading. Please, Dakota, I have nobody else. I do love you, you have to believe me. I studied her for a long moment. The woman who had tormented my childhood was now lying here, claiming love. It was hard to digest. I'll hear what you have to say, I finally said, not committing to anything but curious enough to stay. But don't expect me to forget the past so easily. Sitting across from Veronica in the stark, sterile hospital room, I could hardly reconcile this frail figure with the woman who had once so masterfully controlled our household. Yet, as she began to speak, the familiar undertones of manipulation in her voice were unmistakable, reminding me that some things never truly change. Dakota, she started, her voice quavering, I've made a mess of things since your father passed. The inheritance, it's all gone. Her admission didn't surprise me. Gone? How? I asked, though a part of me didn't want to hear the sordid details. I wasn't wise with the money, she confessed, avoiding my gaze. Bad investments, debts, it's all squandered. I shook my head in disbelief. This was the woman who used to preach about prudence and responsibility, and you're telling me this why? Veronica looked up, her eyes locking onto mine. The doctors say I need surgery, but I can't afford it. I have no insurance left. So, what do you expect me to do about it? I asked, feeling a mixture of anger and incredulity. I need your help, Dakota. I need you to pay for the surgery, she said, the tone of her voice shifting from plea to expectation. I couldn't help but laugh, albeit bitterly. After everything you've put me through, you really think I'd help you? She tried to play the sympathy card again. You're my family, Dakota. The only one I have. Family? I retorted. You never treated me like family. Why should I start now? Her demeanor changed then, the mask of the frail, sick woman slipping. You owe me, Dakota. I took care of you when your father died. You call that care? You made my life miserable. I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Ungrateful child, she hissed, her face contorting into a scowl. I should have thrown you out when I had the chance. And why didn't you? I challenged her. Because I thought there was something in it for me, she admitted with a sneer. But you owe me, and you're going to pay, one way or another. Her threat was as clear as it was desperate. You're threatening me? After all these years, you still think you can control me? I'm not just threatening, Dakota. I'll sue you if I have to. I'll claim alimony, emotional distress, whatever it takes. She spat out, her voice filled with venom. Go ahead and try. I shot back, standing up. You won't get a single penny from me. She was seething with rage now. You'll regret this, Dakota. I'll make your life hell again. After my meeting with Veronica, I was seething with anger and disbelief. I couldn't fathom her audacity, her sheer nerve. I vented to Aunt Lucy over a cup of strong coffee in her cozy kitchen. Can you believe that woman? I raged, slamming my mug down. After all these years, she's still trying to control me, to squeeze me for every penny. Aunt Lucy, ever the rock, shook her head in disgust. She's a snake, Dakota. Always has been. Thinks she can just waltz back into your life and demand money? It's ludicrous. I was pacing now, my heart racing. She's threatening to take me to court, Lucy, for alimony, of all things. Let her try. Aunt Lucy snorted. She won't get a dime. You're not responsible for her mess. But Veronica was true to her word. A few weeks later, I was served with papers. She was suing me for alimony, claiming she was entitled to it after years of caring for me. It was laughable. In court, Veronica played the frail, wronged woman. Your Honor, I took this girl in when her father passed, she said, her voice oozing fake sincerity. I provided for her, and now she's abandoning me in my time of need. I could hardly believe the gall. When it was my turn, I stood, my hands trembling with a mix of nerves and anger. That's a lie, Your Honor. She made my life a living hell. My aunt here has been my guardian and support for years. The judge looked over his glasses at Veronica. Is this true, Mrs. Harrison? Were you not this girl's legal guardian? Veronica faltered, her facade cracking. Well, legally, no. But morally, I was her. Morally? I cut in, unable to contain my frustration. There was nothing moral about the way you treated me. The judge reviewed the case, his expression stern. After considering the testimonies and the fact that Ms. Harrison's aunt was her legal guardian for the latter years, this court finds no basis for alimony. Claim dismissed. Veronica's face twisted into a mask of rage and disbelief. This isn't over, Dakota, she spat as we left the courtroom. But it was over. As Aunt Lucy and I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Veronica's last attempt to control me had failed. I was free from her grasp, once and for all. You did good, Dakota, Aunt Lucy said, squeezing my hand. She can't hurt you anymore. I nodded, feeling a surge of relief and newfound strength. I know. It's finally over. That day marked the end of a long, painful chapter in my life. Veronica had no hold over me anymore. I had faced her in court and won. I was free to live my life on my terms, without the shadow of her manipulation looming over me. The courthouse steps behind me felt like a bridge between my troubled past and a hopeful future. Aunt Lucy and I headed to a small cafe nearby, a place that had become our spot for post-court discussions. So, it's finally over, I said, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. I can't believe after all these years, I'm finally free of her. Aunt Lucy nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and relief. You stood up to her, Dakota. That took guts. You've come a long way from the scared little girl you once were. I smiled, a genuine sense of accomplishment washing over me. Yeah, I guess I have. It's just, I never thought it would end like this. It rarely does, Aunt Lucy said, taking a sip of her tea. But the important thing is it did end. You can finally put Veronica and all that mess behind you. Her understanding and support were like a beacon in the dark. Thanks, Lucy. I don't know what I would have done without you. She smiled warmly. That's what family is for. And remember, you've got a whole life ahead of you. A life that's yours to shape. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about future plans, my work, travel dreams, and personal goals. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely excited about what lay ahead. As I walked home that evening, the city lights sparkled a little brighter, and the air felt a little fresher. I realized that for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from Veronica's shadow, free from the fear and the pain she had caused. Back in my apartment, I stood by the window, looking out over the bustling city. This was my world now, a world full of possibilities. I thought about everything I had overcome, the battles I had fought, and the strength I had found within myself. I was no longer the victim of my past, but the architect of my future. I decided to start a journal, to document this new chapter in my life. As I penned down my first entry, I felt a sense of peace and optimism. The road ahead would have its challenges, but I was ready to face them head-on. Here's to new beginnings, I whispered to myself, closing the journal with a sense of finality. Veronica's chapter in my life was closed, but mine was just beginning. I was ready to write my own story, one filled with hope, resilience, and the freedom to be who I truly was. I live a stone's throw away from the waves, the kind of place that's as unassuming as the life I lead. In a large house, where the salty air never quite leaves, I spend my days teaching at the local high school and my evenings listening to the sea. It's just me and John most days, my husband. He's a rep for a trading firm, always on the phone or typing away on his laptop, trying to make ends meet. Then there's our Annie, out there living her fresh out of law school life. I remember the day she told us she'd be specializing in divorce law. We were sitting right here at this old wooden table that's seen better days. Annie had that look she gets when she's serious, her brow all furrowed. "Mom, Dad, I'm going into divorce law," she declared, like she was bracing for a storm. John looked up from his plate, a piece of steak half-sliced, and his eyes met mine like we were both thinking the same thing. "Divorce, huh?" he said, the word hanging in the air like it didn't belong in our home. Annie leaned back, a challenge in her posture. "Yeah. And don't worry, if you guys ever get tired of each other, I can hook you up with a good deal." She tried to make it sound light, a joke, but her jokes always sound like she's half serious. John's laugh was a grunt, more air than sound. "A comedian, our daughter," he said, his tone dry as sandpaper. I tried to smooth things over, keep the peace. "Annie, love, we're fine. But it's good you've got a plan." My words felt hollow, even to my own ears. Annie just shrugged and took another bite of her food, but I saw the way her eyes narrowed. She always was too smart, too perceptive for her own good. Annie's visits are the only times John puts his darn phone down for longer than a minute. She breezes in like the fresh sea wind, all bright and full of that big city lawyer energy. "How's the old seaside retreat?" she'd ask, the nickname for our home she coined as a teenager. John would throw an arm around her shoulder. "Standing strong, just like us," he'd say with forced cheer. After another round of small talk, she leaves, and we're back to the sound of the sea. That's our life, a cycle of work, quiet dinners, and the unspoken things that sit between us like unwanted guests. And as much as John bugs me sometimes, with his comments and his distance, I hold on to this life like a lifeline. It's what I know. It's where I'm supposed to be, even if sometimes I wish the sea would rise up and carry me away to somewhere I could start all over, just me, the breeze, and nothing else. The days seemed longer lately, each moment heavier than the last. I felt it most at dinner. That used to be a time for us to talk about our day, to laugh a little. Not so much now. John's words had turned from indifference to sharp jabs. "Another casserole?" he'd say, eyeing the food like it was an enemy. "You know, that's not helping your waistline." It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, cold, like he was talking to a stranger. I'd stand there, spatula in hand, feeling smaller than I used to. "It's what I had time to make," I would mumble, not looking at him, because if I did, he'd see the hurt in my eyes, and I couldn't let him see that. "You could make time for a salad or something," John would push on, his chair scraping back as he'd stand up, ready to dismiss whatever I had to say next. "I walk every morning," I'd defend weakly, not that it mattered to him. "Yeah, and you walk right back to the fridge afterwards," he'd throw back before making his way to the couch, leaving me to eat alone. I wanted to shout, to throw the casserole at the wall, anything to make him see how those words cut me up inside. But I didn't. Instead, I'd serve myself, eat quietly, and clean up. John, meanwhile, would be shouting at the TV or yapping on the phone. That's how most evenings went by. One night, I gathered the scraps of my courage and tried to confront him about it. I sat next to him on the couch, the TV blaring some sports game. "John, can we talk?" He half-turned, a frown already making a home on his face. "What now? Do you have to be so harsh about my weight?" I asked. The words felt like heavy stones in my mouth. John snorted. "What? I'm motivating you. If I don't say it, who will? You want to get bigger and bigger?" That's when the dam broke. The tears came hot and fast, and I couldn't stop them. "You think I don't know? You think I don't feel it every single day?" My voice was a mix of anger and shame, a cocktail I was getting used to. He stood up then, his body language screaming annoyance. "Oh great, here come the waterworks. Do something about it instead of crying, for crying out loud." I got up, wiped my eyes, angry at myself for letting him see me cry. "Never mind," I said, my voice hollow. "Just, never mind." The room fell silent except for the commentators on the TV. And like that, we'd go to bed, backs turned, walls up, pretending we didn't feel the chasm that was growing between us. It had become our new normal, this walking on eggshells, this biting of tongues until they bled. Sea travel is my husband's new hobby. John wouldn't drop it with the yacht thing. "Babe, think about it, sailing wherever we want, whenever we want," he said, thumbing through a glossy magazine that smelled like fresh ink and unrealistic dreams. Sitting there with my knitting needles clicking away, I said, "John, we ain't exactly sailors. That money's tucked away for emergencies, not big toys." He tossed the magazine down, it slid across the table landing with the image of a yacht looking up at me as if to say, "Hey, don't I look fun?" John followed my gaze. "That's just it, Claire. It's always about what if. What if we just did something wild for once?" I put my knitting down. "A yacht's not just wild, John. It's bonkers. You get green when we cross the river on the bridge. How you gonna handle the ocean?" He crossed the room to where I sat and crouched down beside me, took my hands into his. "Claire, I want us to have something to show for our work, something to enjoy. You don't think touring the coast, just you and me, doesn't sound exciting?" His eyes had that twinkle that I hadn't seen in a long time. They were the kind of eyes that got me to say "I do" a couple of decades ago. I chewed on my lip, thinking, you and me, out on the open sea? Just the fish and the stars and, knowing our luck, a storm or two? John grinned. "We'd weather it. Like we always do." Here was my husband, a man that I've shared more than half my life with, looking like a kid asking for a bicycle for Christmas. Something about that was too hard to ignore. I sighed. "All right, I won't make any promises, but I'll think on it. Maybe some adventure wouldn't be such a bad thing." John's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Really? You mean it?" "Yeah, I mean it. But I swear, John, if I see one hint of green on your face, I'm turning that yacht around and selling it to the highest bidder." He laughed and hugged me. Deal, he said, and I couldn't help but laugh, too. Who knows, maybe a bit of sea air would do us both some good. But I was going to think on it long and hard first. There was plenty of time and reasons to be practical, but maybe the impractical was what we needed to shake things up. Maybe. The phone rang a few times before Annie picked up. Hey Mom, what's up? Her voice always had a way of sounding like she was in the middle of something big. Annie, we need to talk. Got a minute? I sat on the edge of the bed, playing with the cord of the phone like I used to when I was a teenager. For you? Always. Shoot. I took a deep breath. So, your dad has this crazy idea about buying a yacht with the money Grandma and Grandpa left me. A yacht? There was a pause, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes. What are you gonna do with a yacht? That's what I said. But he's all starry-eyed about it. Sailing, adventure, blah blah blah. I'm not sure. It's a big risk, a big expense. Okay, think. This is your money, right? The money Grandma and Grandpa left for you, not Dad's new toy fund. Her words were sharp but needed. Right. It's mine. For our family. For things like the house or your loans. Exactly. Annie's voice softened. Mom, if you decide to go through with this yacht business, make sure it's in your name. Just to cover your bases, you know? There was a wisdom there that I couldn't ignore. You really think I need to do that? Absolutely. Cover your back, Mom. If things go south, or hell, if Dad gets seasick and hates the damn thing, at least it's yours to sell. I chuckled, a real laugh. Your dad, seasick, now that I'd pay to see. See, you're laughing. Yachts are silly. But listen, if it makes you guys happy, who am I to stop you? The chat with Annie got my head straight. She had a point. I needed to think about what I wanted and to protect myself if things didn't go as planned. It was all fun and games imagining clear skies and calm waters, but I knew life was rarely that kind. So, I should just tell him no? Keep the status quo? I was fishing now, unsure of what I needed her to say. Annie was quick to reply. Hell no, do what makes you happy. But be smart about it. I love Dad, but this is a big decision, and it's not just his decision. It's yours too. Thanks, Annie. I needed that, I said, feeling a bit more grounded than before. The call ended on a good note. Annie might just be the most sensible person I knew. The yacht? Maybe it'd be fun. Or maybe it'd be the most expensive mistake of my life. But one thing was for sure, any decision made would be on my terms. I'll never forget the day John and I walked down the dock, keys in hand, towards what could have passed for a small house floating on the water. She was ours. And by ours, I mean mine, because I took Annie's advice and made sure of it. But, credit where credit's due, John was being good about the whole thing, sticking to his word. I can't believe you actually did it, John said, a faint grin on his lips. Neither can I said, my voice a mixture of excitement and pure terror. We sat on the deck that evening, just the pair of us, with a couple of cold beers. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky all sorts of oranges and reds. John broke the silence. Claire, I know this was a big ask. Thank you. I glanced at him, surprised. You sure you're not mad it's in my name? He shook his head. Nah, you're steering this ship. Figuratively and, I guess, literally now. We chuckled, clinked our bottles together, and for a moment there was an easy peace between us that I hadn't felt in years. But life, like the sea, doesn't stay calm for long. The next morning, I was clutching a coffee mug, staring out at the gentle waves when our neighbor, Ted, ambled over. He lived alone ever since his wife passed and had the sort of face that told you life hadn't been a walk in the park. Morning, Claire, Ted called out, a smile tucked under his bushy mustache. Morning, Ted. Coffee? He held up his own mug. Already on it. Thanks, though. Just wanted to say congrats on the yacht. She's a beauty. I nodded, appreciating his kindness. Thanks, Ted. Still trying to believe it's real. You folks planning to sail off into the sunset anytime soon? He asked, interest sparking in his eyes. I laughed, still working out the details. Ted nodded, took a sip. There was an awkward silence before he said, if you ever need a hand with anything, repairs, or even a crew member, just shout. Used to do a bit of sailing myself, back in the day. Appreciate it, Ted. We'll keep it in mind. Back home, with groceries put away, I settled onto the couch with a sigh. I was about to dive into my new sailing book when John's voice drifted from the kitchen. Claire, what's for dinner tonight? Figured we'd do something easy. Pizza sound good? I called back without lifting my eyes from the page. Pizza's perfect, he said, coming in to sit beside me. Need any help with planning the maiden voyage? I put the book down. Yeah, maybe. Could use some company going through these charts. As we spread the maps and charts across the coffee table, something about this whole situation felt like we were on an even playing field for the first time. We threw ideas back and forth, sometimes agreeing, sometimes not, but it was all friendly. No arguing, no one trying to pull rank. I'd been floating on the buzz of anticipation all morning, thinking about that cruise John promised. We'd been planning it for months. I'd even taken time off work, unpaid leave no less, to line up with his busy schedule. Today, I grabbed a new suitcase from the department store, something sturdy and bright. You couldn't miss it even if it tried to hide in the belly of our yacht. I came home, key turning in the lock, ready to see John's usual mess of packed stuff all over the living room floor. Only thing is, there was nothing. No mess, no John. Just a hollow kind of silence that makes your heart sink. I called out, John, but my voice bounced around the empty space. That's when I spotted the note, all smug-like on the kitchen counter and divorce papers underneath, like they were nothing more than a grocery list. Picking up the note, I read his jagged scrawl. Thanks for the yacht, Claire. I'm gonna need it more than you. You always loved the sea, right? Well, so does she. The young kind of love. See ya. My hands trembled and the paper crinkled in my grip. I had to read it again because no way did it just say what I thought it did. But there it was, the same words staring back at me. He took the yacht, the new mistress, probably half his age, and left a damn note. Son of a... The shock turned into something hot and angry, but it was the sight of those divorce papers, signed, ready to go, like he didn't care about anything we had, that did me in. My chest got tight. I couldn't catch my breath. I sat down, slow, because it felt like my head was split in two. The note was a blur as I looked at it again. I stood up, shaky on my feet, a suitcase still in my hand like a bad joke. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. He'd planned this, waited until I was out, making plans, buying luggage. And for what? So he could run off with my dream? I should have screamed, broken something. Instead, I stood there, hollowed out. I saw my phone on the counter, buzzing with missed calls. I ignored them. What was I supposed to say? Oh, hey, my husband dumped me for a little adventure on the sea. With another woman. Yep, left me with a note. And hey, guess who's newly single? No, I couldn't deal with that yet. I got myself off the floor, leaving the suitcase and the note where they lay. The papers though, I picked them up, the weight of them heavy in my hand. The feeling was starting to come back, a creeping realization that it was over, whatever it had been. I had an urge then, standing in that empty kitchen, to grab that suitcase, chase them down, make a scene. But what for? To be the crazy lady shouting on the docks? No, that wasn't me. The last thing I remember was tossing those papers onto the counter. They landed like a whisper, silent but so damn loud in my head. Then darkness took me, like the deep sea he'd sailed into, the kind of dark that swallows you whole. Blinking to sleep away, I'm staring up at a bleached ceiling. I'm in a hospital, ain't I? Beeps and blips from machines are my sorry orchestra, a sharp contrast to the sound of the waves I was dreaming of just a minute ago. Annie sitting beside me, her hand like a vice grip on mine. If looks could kill, her eyes are locked and loaded for John, no doubt about it. "Hey, look who's back with the living," she says, trying to be light about it, but I can hear the edge in her voice that's just itching for a fight. I'm struggling to find words that aren't just angry spit and fire. How long was I out? The room is swimming a bit, so I focus on her face, steady and angry on my behalf. A couple of hours. They ran some tests, said you fainted from stress. It's the simplicity of that statement that's a slap. Just stress. Not the world-ending feeling of my husband leaving me on an adventure crusade with his new fling, and definitely not the agony of my plans being trampled under his proud feet. Found your note, Annie continues, her fist tightening around the paper she's waving slightly. This is lower than low. If he were here now, I'd... What did you do with the papers? I interrupt her midway because if I let her go on, she'd be spouting murder plans, and honestly, I don't have the energy to calm her down. Signed, sealed, and will be delivered first thing when we get you out of here. I'll make sure that he gets them. The disgust in her voice is sweeter than any medicine they've got here. But the bitterness is still in my mouth, like I've been sucking on lemon wedges. Wait, I signed them? I'm scratching my head, not remembering a darn thing. Yeah, the nurse was a witness. You don't mess around, even half-conscious. I can't help but chuckle, which turns into a cough. Well, ain't that something? You need anything? Water, revenge, a hitman? Annie's only half joking, I can tell. I try to sit up, wincing as the room decides to do a little spin. I need to think. Need to figure out my next move. Yeah, that's the spirit. Annie pumps her fist, as if to knock out an imaginary John. I take a deep breath, the future's still one hazy mess. But it's my mess to clean up, my life to straighten out, and no cheating, lying dirtbag husband is gonna stand in my way. So, what now? You gonna lie around here feeling sorry for yourself? 'Cause if you are, I want to order pizza. Nah, I say, pushing the sheets away and swinging my legs to the side of the bed, slowly finding my ground. I'm starving. Let's get some pizza. That's my girl, Annie says, giving me a hand up. Let's blow this popsicle stand. Holding on to Annie, I know it's not just my legs that need the support, it's this whole new mess I've got to navigate. But with her by my side, tossing ex-husband's notes around with that fireball attitude, I feel like maybe I got a fighting chance after all. The morning after, my daughter, Annie, is sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her laptop open to the online banking portal. Her brow furrows, and she turns the screen to me. Mom, our account, it's empty. I lean in, squinting at the cold zeros staring back. My stomach drops. That snake, I mutter. John had stripped us clean. Annie's fingers dance over the keys, checking the transaction history. He took it all yesterday, she says, her voice low but fierce. What are we gonna do? I'm about to answer when a thought strikes her. Wait, the yacht. Doesn't it have GPS? If we can find the yacht, we can find him. She's got a point. I reach for the phone without hesitation and dial. Police, I say, my voice steadier than I feel. I'd like to report a stolen boat. Yes, and theft from my bank account too. Annie's tapping away on her phone now, probably digging for the GPS login info. I trust her with tech stuff. She's always been savvy like that. Got it, she says, handing me a slip of paper. The location is scrawled in her neat print. I relay it to the officer on the line and hang up. The ball's rolling now. No stopping it. We head down to the marina, where the yacht is supposed to be. And there it is, all sleek and expensive, exactly where the GPS said it'd be. Cops all around it, blue lights spinning silent in the morning light. And there's John, in handcuffs, blubbering like a baby. Please, Claire. I'm sorry. Call them off. I didn't mean any harm. He wails as we walk up. His mistress is beside him, a fiery thing that snarls and snaps like a cornered animal. Annie steps up before I can speak, her voice cold as January ice. "You're going to trial, John." She's eyeing him like something nasty stuck to her shoe. "That yacht? Registered in Mom's name. And since you divorced her, that grand exit of yours turns into grand theft." I fold my arms, the sea air chilly on my cheeks, watching as John's face crumbles like a sandcastle at high tide. "But, Claire," John's plea is a broken record now, skipping on the worst hit of the year. "I'll leave her. Just take me back." His mistress freezes, mouth gaping. "What?" she shrieks, staring him down. Then she's clawing at him, hissing insults that could peel paint. The cops have to pull her off. Annie's watching it all with an eyebrow raised so high it could lift off her forehead. "Nice girlfriend you picked." As the dust settles, officers pull John and his screaming mistress away. One of the cops ambles over, tipping his hat. "Ma'am, we'll get your yacht back to you, and as for the bank account, you should get at least half of that 15,000 plus damages." I nod, a small, bitter twist to my lips. "Thanks, officer." Annie's by my side, her hand squeezing my shoulder. "And I'll handle his case. Don't worry, Mom. He'll pay for every penny and then some." As we leave the marina, Annie wraps an arm around me, trying to be the strong one. But I see the anger for her dumb father, the concern for our future. "Don't worry, kiddo," I assure her. "We got this." She grins, all teeth and resolve. "Damn straight we do." We walk away with the seagulls crying overhead, the chapter closed on a man who thought he could leave us with nothing. But we're still standing, and this tale? It's just another lesson learned. What happened to John? John's reputation is in tatters, his job a lost cause, his mistress bolted as soon as the cuffs snapped shut. He's left with nothing but the echoes of his mistakes.